Acho que pode voltar.
Só mais uns 2 minutinhos para começar. A gente está aí, já fizemos todos os alinhamentos com nossos especialistas internacionais, que vão estar com a gente daqui a meia hora. E a gente vai começar, então, falando um pouco do Hub, as nossas características, o que a gente já tem feito. Eu trouxe também algumas novidades sobre economia circular e a relação com os Objetivos de Desenvolvimento Sustentável. Então, já a gente começa. Fernando, bota nosso slide de bem-vindos para a gente falar com todos. Já vamos entrar. Obrigada a todos. Só mais um minutinho.
Segue a agenda. Peço que todos fiquem com o microfone mudo, no mute.
Bem, então acho que a gente pode começar, senão a gente acaba atrasando para a segunda parte. Então, bom dia a todos. Fernando, pode deixar... Ou então deixa que eu compartilhe aqui minha tela. Me libera aí a entrada, Fernando.
Uhum. Pronto.
Então, eu queria primeiramente agradecer a presença de todos. A gente está com a nossa equipe aí completa, Ana Rúbia, Camila, Bandone, Natália, Fernando, Geni, parceira também de longa data, e obrigada aí pelos membros que já entraram. Então, a ideia dessa primeira parte da manhã é fazer uma breve apresentação sobre o Hub, para aqueles nossos convidados que estão aí chegando recentemente. Eu trouxe algumas novidades sobre a relação da economia circular com os Objetivos de Desenvolvimento Sustentável, e aí a gente pode fazer um tempinho para um bate-papo, e aí a gente vai entrar com os nossos especialistas internacionais, a gente vai ter uma abertura oficial do embaixador da Holanda no Brasil, e depois a gente vai ter também a demonstração do trailer do documentário que a gente fez junto com a Holanda. Então, eu vou começar só apresentando a gente. A Exchange for Change é uma empresa de consultoria que tem a missão de influenciar a transição para a economia circular no Brasil, junto a especialistas internacionais, desde 2015. Eu trouxe aqui um pouco da nossa linha do tempo para a gente ter uma noção de como que a gente já tem um legado, já tem um trabalho que a gente vem fazendo aí no mercado brasileiro, que não, nada acontece de uma hora para outra, né? Então, desde 2015, 2016, que a gente vem trabalhando para disseminar esse novo modelo macroeconômico e a importância e as oportunidades para o Brasil. E o nosso primeiro ano teve uma parceria muito forte com a Holanda, que a gente fez uma série de rodadas de negócios no Rio de Janeiro, com a Firjan, e foi muito importante para amadurecer o nosso conhecimento. Eu digo que 2017 foi uma fase exploratória, um movimento bem proativo da gente com as empresas. A gente criou o nosso grupo de estudo, ampliou para uma rede brasileira e começamos também uma interação mais forte com eventos internacionais, né? Sempre com aquela característica de trazer coisas para o Brasil atualizadas e em primeira mão, para a gente co-criar e adaptar soluções para a realidade brasileira. Em 2018 começou o que a gente chama uma fase de consolidação, que a gente vê o interesse das empresas de uma forma mais robusta. Fizemos um projeto de estratégia de economia circular para a Gerdau, que foi muito interessante e que foi um pouco a sementinha do hub de economia circular, que a gente aprendeu que a economia circular não se faz sozinha, ficou muito claro diante de uma empresa que quer inserir esse mindset no seu negócio. Fizemos um trabalho com o BNDES, com a FINEP, e aí começamos, então, o que eu chamo de fase prática, com a criação do Hub, esse ecossistema de transição, para que a gente possa, então, lançar soluções escaláveis no mercado brasileiro. Então, o nosso núcleo de economia circular foi um grupo de estudo que começou em 2016, e eu quis destacar porque é uma iniciativa muito bacana, que formou-se um grupo de pessoas interessadas em debater o tema, junto a especialistas internacionais, e isso foi muito importante para amadurecer o nosso conhecimento sobre o tema. E durante a evolução, a gente foi criando uma rede multidisciplinar que, inclusive, nos levou a montar uma equipe de trabalho. A Ana Rubia, a Natália, que estão aqui com a gente hoje, foram frutos aí desse nosso grupo de estudo, que estão agora com a gente, né, trabalhando junto para essa transição. E o ponto-chave para a gente destacar é que a gente vai lançar, então, a novidade é um livro justamente de aprendizado do NEC, com vários especialistas de 10 países diferentes. A gente tem o prefácio da Isabela Teixeira, que é ex-ministra do Meio Ambiente e conselheira do Hub, e a apresentação do Peter Jensen, que é um especialista holandês, que traçou os 8 passos para a transição, e algumas iniciativas brasileiras. Temos também como novidade o documentário que a gente fez com a Tocha Filmes e a Globo Filmes, e a gente vai passar um trailer hoje, daqui a pouquinho, para vocês verem como que está ficando, em breve nos cinemas. Então, o nosso ponto de aprendizado e de destaque, que a gente sempre fala com as empresas, é que a economia circular é sobre o que você, não é sobre o que você já tem, e sim sobre o que você pode atingir. Então, foi justamente nesse contexto que a gente começou a mostrar que a economia circular não chega para solucionar os problemas. Ela modifica o sistema e evita os problemas. Então, a gente coloca que tem 3 elementos chaves no processo de transição. A gente tem que pensar sempre na inovação tecnológica. A tecnologia, ela traz e ela acelera esses modelos de negócio de economia circular, porque a gente precisa ter escala. E para ter escala, a gente precisa desenvolver parcerias, a gente precisa trabalhar de forma conjunta. E é dessa forma que a gente aprende que é uma visão sistêmica e uma ação colaborativa para a transição. E um ponto interessante que está sendo muito discutido agora, desde a COP21, que foi destacado que os modelos de negócio da economia circular são aqueles que vão permitir o desenvolvimento dos países e mantendo aquele limite de temperatura ou até mesmo reduzindo o gap para não atingir, não passar de 1,5 graus Celsius. Então, uma série de estudos estão sendo feitos agora para destacar a importância da economia circular na relação de como que os países podem atingir esses compromissos globais, né? Então, a economia circular, ela já está sendo colocada e que precisa ser incluída na próxima revisão dos acordos entre os países. Então, esse relatório é bem interessante porque mostra que, inclusive, destaca que a economia circular e todos os seus princípios não são só uma oportunidade para países industrializados. Eles beneficiam também países em desenvolvimento, porque esses modelos de negócio eles podem organizar essas metas globais, trazendo um equilíbrio entre a sustentabilidade e o crescimento econômico. E, além disso, são esses modelos de negócio que vão permitir a criação de novos empregos, o desenvolvimento da indústria da remanufatura e toda uma transição para um modelo de serviço, de reparo. Então, toda essa tecnologia, toda essa disponibilidade para influenciar produtos mais duráveis e esses novos modelos de consumo são inerentes à economia circular e vão contribuir para os objetivos do desenvolvimento sustentável. Um outro relatório bem recente que saiu foi justamente da Holanda, colocando que para a economia circular realmente se estabelecer nos países, o objetivo de desenvolvimento sustentável que é mais relevante é o 17, que estabelece parcerias para atingir as metas. Então, a gente coloca aqui, a gente mostra que a transição, ela necessariamente precisa desse olhar sistêmico, dessa mudança sistêmica e esse modelo de trabalho mais colaborativo. Então, basicamente, o que levou a gente a montar o Hub de Economia Circular foi a nossa percepção de que a estratégia para a economia circular muitas vezes fica baseada na discussão sobre fluxo de material, design de produto, mas a gente precisa ampliar o olhar e pensar que a gente pode estar criando novos tipos de transação, a gente precisa de novas relações comerciais, né, um equilíbrio na cadeia de valor, integrando todos os elos da cadeia de valor. Isso requer uma mudança de responsabilidade e pensar em efetividade na oferta de performance. Então, esses foram os nossos benchmarks que a gente foi olhar, né? A tendência do mercado era a construção dessas redes de negócios para influenciar a economia circular, sempre baseada no modelo de projeto, de liderança empresarial. Então, a gente tem PACE, Platform for Accelerating the Circular Economy, que foi constituída pelo World Economic Forum, e nós estamos muito contentes de ter o David Ginty aqui com a gente daqui a pouquinho, para falar um pouco como que o PACE foi construído, como que são feitos esses projetos e como que está seguindo nessa coalizão de empresas para a transição para a economia circular. Então, a gente lançou o nosso ecossistema em novembro de 2019, no Sustainable Brands, e, basicamente, a ideia é reunir empresas líderes comprometidas a trabalharem juntas para superar barreiras, quebrar paradigmas e viabilizar projetos, acelerando a implementação da economia circular no Brasil. O grande diferencial que a gente traz é a união de todos os elos da cadeia. Então, a gente tem categorias de empresas, a categoria de ativadores, são aquelas empresas que estão realmente querendo fazer um trabalho interno de diagnóstico, elas recebem um circular scan para movimentar todas as lideranças, para construir esse mindset circular e desenhar um plano estratégico que, então, vai ser colocado dentro do Hub como parte da inteligência coletiva do Hub. A categoria provedores são aquelas empresas que trazem soluções, que complementam e integram a cadeia de valor para transformar resíduos em matéria-prima, para permitir a rastreabilidade dos materiais, um conhecimento melhor da cadeia, uma transparência. E os apoiadores são todos aqueles que fortalecem o nosso ecossistema, trazendo recurso humano, financeiro, possibilidade de fundos e expertise. Então, a gente já vem trabalhando com várias empresas, né, ao longo da cadeia de valor, a gente está mapeando, a gente quer ter um ecossistema bem rico, com todos os elos. Estes são os primeiros membros que já comprovaram o interesse de participar dessa ação colaborativa e sistêmica. Agradecemos a todos. Eu acho que tem alguns membros aqui conosco. Obrigada pela participação. Depois eu vejo quem está aqui com a gente. Estou vendo Paulo, a Meva, a Júlia e Diogo, Moisés. Em breve vamos ter uma conversa aí entre todos. Então, para ir concluindo, a gente montou um conselho consultivo que vai nos guiar e contribuir com o posicionamento estratégico do Hub. Então, a gente fez um webinar internacional com a Ladeia, que é da Eslovênia, foi o nosso primeiro webinar internacional, e hoje a gente tem o Freak, nos trazendo aí a visão também do Holland Circular Hotspot. Os 4 eixos de trabalho que a gente foca é justamente essa parte de não só trazer a solução dos projetos, né, através dessa estruturação de aliança, mas a parte de educação, de engajamento e a comunicação entre todos. A gente tem uma metodologia única que a gente construiu, baseada em 3 fases de projeto. Né? A primeira fase é o que a gente chama de alinhamento conceitual, onde a gente vai fazer os diagnósticos individuais dos membros, para então a gente criar essa inteligência coletiva, juntar todos os elementos da cadeia de valor e, através dessa articulação estratégica, da habilidade que a gente está formando dentro do Hub, a gente em breve vai ter uma novidade aí também, que a gente está formando um grupo de especialistas circulares, que aguardem que vocês já vão conhecer os nossos especialistas, que vão ficar responsáveis justamente por esse pensamento estratégico, desenvolvimento de projeto em todos os setores. E o que é mais bacana justamente do Hub é o fato de ser multidisciplinar e multissetorial, porque a gente consegue criar conexões e o que a gente chama de conexões inusitadas, que é quando uma solução de uma cadeia pode estar em outra cadeia de valor. A gente ainda está fechando esse primeiro ciclo de empresas para a gente poder montar esse cluster de projeto. A gente precisa de um grupo específico para montar essa inteligência coletiva nessa iniciativa que tem um planejamento de durar 2 anos. Então, basicamente, o diferencial é que a gente trabalha com o olhar das 4 dimensões da economia circular. Então, fazendo uma comparação com o slide do iceberg, os 2 primeiros elementos, fornecimento e fluxo, é muito interno, como que a empresa vê as matérias-primas, os resíduos, se ela tem uma integração na cadeia de valor, como ela está fazendo o design dos seus produtos, para a gente, então, chegar na parte de governança e negócios circulares. É aí que a gente vê a oportunidade de gerar mais colaboração, transparência e novas parcerias. Então, basicamente, a economia circular, a gente fala que tem 3 novos R's. A gente precisa reavaliar o processo produtivo, rever valores, atitudes e relações e redefinir produtos e consumo. E aí a gente traz, para fechar e já permitir aí um debate rápido entre nós, antes da gente chamar os nossos especialistas, países já estão considerando fortemente essa economia circular como modelo base de crescimento. A gente vai ouvir da Holanda que ele já tem a visão 2050 de ser totalmente circular. Então, o interessante é que, apesar desse nosso momento atual, da pandemia, o que nos mostra cada vez mais é que o que era muitas vezes a gente não queria ver ou aceitar, né, os impactos ambientais da indústria, as desigualdades sociais, o coronavírus está nos mostrando isso muito em evidência. Então, uma série de discussões, de planos de recuperação, já consideram que é realmente imperativo, importante, a gente fazer essa recuperação dentro de um olhar de economia de baixo carbono e circular. A Eslovênia também é um outro país que já está bem avançado. Eles vão ter a presidência da União Europeia no ano que vem, e eles já se uniram e criaram uma aliança sob a liderança do Circular Change e a condução do European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, como apoiador também. Já tem 82 parceiros de 12 setores, e a aliança e o comprometimento é que justamente precisamos seguir com uma economia sustentável, baseada em tecnologias verdes, com princípios circulares. Então, é isso que eu queria deixar por agora. Queria saber se alguém tem algum comentário, alguma pergunta, para a gente, então, começar aí com a nossa troca de conhecimento com a Holanda. Eu queria aproveitar e já agradecer a presença do embaixador da Holanda no Brasil, Kees. Um prazer ter você conosco. Muito obrigada aí pela sua disponibilidade. A Holanda sempre tem sido uma grande fonte de inspiração aí para a gente, e tenho certeza que vocês trazem muitas oportunidades de desenvolvimento tecnológico, parceria, para a gente seguir aí também com um plano de recuperação para o Brasil, que seja verde, que seja circular.
Muito obrigado.
Já já eu te chamo, então, para a gente fazer a abertura. Alguém quer fazer alguma pergunta, algum comentário? Deixa eu ver quem está aqui mais com a gente. Olá, Meva. Prazer tê-la aqui conosco. Wanda, que bom ter você aqui com a gente de novo. Muito bom a gente ver que, apesar desse momento difícil que a gente está vivendo, um ponto que eu queria colocar e agradecer a todos é que, apesar da gente ter ido do presencial para o virtual, e a gente ainda está num processo, a gente teve que redimensionar o nosso hub, o cronograma, as entregas, mas as empresas continuam participando aí com a gente do debate, se interessando, e esse é o nosso papel de justamente prover informação, criar essas pontes com especialistas internacionais, para que a gente possa passar por esse momento mais fortalecido e com informações que nos deixam mais inspirados para essa transição circular que a gente diz que definitivamente é o novo normal, né? Agora essa pandemia está nos mostrando como vulneráveis nós somos e como precisamos, então, de um novo modelo de crescimento. Fabrício, da Enel, prazer estar aqui com a gente. Então, a gente tem Yuri, acabou de entrar. Muito bom ter você aqui com a gente. A gente vai esperar, então, mais alguns minutinhos para começar a nossa sessão em inglês.
O Bia, também nós temos pessoas no YouTube, a Covestro, o Herman está lá, temos pessoas assistindo também num outro canal que vai estar gravado e depois todos podem assistir novamente.
E eu queria destacar também que, após a nossa troca com os holandeses, a gente segue aqui com o nosso bate-papo em português. E não saiam, porque a gente vai ter um lançamento em primeira mão da Plast Weber. Moisés vai nos contar aí sobre um lançamento de um produto que tem como base os princípios da economia circular. E eu vou colocar, então, um pouco também dos nossos próximos passos, as nossas ações da Semana do Meio Ambiente, e fazer uma demonstração aí de alguns dados, das entregas que a gente já fez. E estou vendo aqui que tem gente já chegando no YouTube, nos dizendo aqui que estão nos assistindo, isso é muito bom. Eu acho que é importante essa vontade de aprender, né? de trocar conhecimento, é o primeiro caminho para a transição. Fernando, eu acho que a gente pode, então, passar aqui para o nosso slide da sessão em inglês. I'm going to start to switch to English, and thanks all the participants that have joined us for the English session. And thanks. Hold on, this message is coming. So I have to thanks everybody for joining us. I would like to thank Freek van Eyck, David McGinty, and especially the Dutch consulate in Rio de Janeiro, the Dutch embassy and Keys for being here with us. So I would like to invite Keys for I'm trying to pronounce your name right, but it's not working, right?
Okay.
So thank you very much. Please, it's a pleasure to have you here, and feel free to give us your warm welcome.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, very well. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kees van Rij, right pronunciation for you. I'm the Dutch ambassador in Brazil, located in Brasilia since summer 2018. And let me start by thanking for the opportunity to participate in this important webinar. And thank you, Beatrice Luth, for coordinating. A special welcome also to, and I hope to get to know them virtually of David McKinty and Freek van Eyck, with whom I already had some informal contact yesterday. Well, as the Dutch ambassador in Brazil, I'm very proud of the intensive and constructive cooperation and actions that we are pursuing in circular economy. Of course, today we are talking from Rio de Janeiro. The work exemplary and very well coordinated by our Consulate General, the Consul General Orlando Martin and his team, Niels Venis. But also we have Consulate General in Sao Paulo, and we have two Netherlands business support offices in Belo Horizonte and Porto Alegre, together with the embassy. So we are a network of five different, and we work in also outside Corona times. We always work in a network situations. We work as one team, completely virtually, in all kinds of ongoing activities that we have, in particular in the economic area. So for us, switching to the new Corona reality, not even that difficult, because we were already very much working in a network formation in this country with its huge distances. It's not always possible to meet physically. So quite well accustomed to work in a let's say virtual fashion. Now, because we are like-minded partners, Beatrice, in many areas of international affairs, we support very much working in a network formation in this country with its huge distances. It's not always possible. I hear myself. Is this okay? Hello, hello.
Yeah, it's good.
Yes, it works because I heard like an echo for myself. Okay. Anyhow, so we are like-minded partners in many areas of international affairs. We support Brazil in their mission to join the OECD. It's an important ambition. We also hope to see that the EU-Mercosur trade deal will be finalized and will be ready for ratification in the future. Well, increasingly, we see that new energy, sustainability, and the energy transition are part of our mutual agenda. And no, not a coincidence, the theme of today's event is circular economy, or how to get a waste-free society, which is a very fundamental question. For many years, my country, the Netherlands, has been investing and collaborating in this important area. Circular economy collaboration between Brazil and the Netherlands started in 2015 and generated already more than 10 joint actions. Mention a few examples here. In 2015, Firjan in Rio de Janeiro and our Consulate General in Rio organized a seminar on sustainable solutions for cities, so-called Rio and Holland Circular Economy. In 2016, the Consulate General in Rio brought in a circular economy expert to open Firjan's Environment Action Seminar on Circular Economy, so-called Magna Lecture. And during the Olympic Games in 2016 in Rio de Janeiro, our Consulate General in Rio collaborated in the organization of an event with circular economy experts from Brazil and the Netherlands, as well as businesses and institutions from both countries at the Holland Heineken House, as with seminar, workshops, and roundtables. And in 2017, a book called Economia Circular Holanda, BRASIL da Teoria à Prática, was published based on all previous cooperations. I think we have copies of that book still for those who are interested. In 2018, the Dutch diplomatic network in Brazil, through the Consulate General in Rio, became an associated member of the #1 think tank in Brazil, CEBRI, the Brazilian Center for International Relations. And this partnership brought the opportunity to showcase Circo's methodology to entrepreneurs. Also in 2018, the Consulate General in Rio started the initiative to bring Circo to train Firjan on circular economy for business models. And in February of this year, 2020, we formalized such collaboration with an MOU signed between the Dutch Circular Economy Association Circo and Firjan. This is a very important step towards introducing circular business concepts within the private sector industry. Such collaboration, in my view, is essential because some say that the energy transition and implementation of the Paris Treaty on climate change and CO2 reduction will hamper economic growth. But the fundamental changes occurring in these areas are an economic opportunity, and circular business models are a good example. They help to implement the circular economy as well as circular agriculture. That's another area where the Netherlands are rather experienced already and are pursuing an active agenda, very much promoted by our government. In fact, ambitious sustainable action goes hand in hand with economic growth and job creation. That's a very strong conviction of my government. Generating new impulses, innovation, new business models, and new markets, and therefore leading to economic prosperity. Therefore, the so-called energy transition is widely supported, even pushed by the private sector in my country. For instance, a very well-known company, Royal Dutch Shell, very active in Brazil as well, is very, very much committed to this, also in Europe and in the Netherlands. The companies see it as necessary, part of their social responsibility and full of business opportunities. In Brazil, we see a similar view, and all players involved in circular economy today have a similar stimulating role. Let me end by saying that, to my knowledge, no country is better positioned than Brazil to benefit from the energy transition. In other words, let's join forces in the energy transition to the mutual benefit of our societies. There is plenty of opportunity. I thank you, and I wish you a pleasant and fruitful event today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have been learning and continue this collaboration with the Netherlands. So I'll just provide a short introduction for our international guests about the Brazilian hub, and we will follow with a demonstration of our documentary that we also recorded in the Netherlands and Brazil. Before I start, I just want to welcome Goraz, the Slovenia ambassador. I'm very glad to hear that you had a chat recently about possibilities for circular transition in Brazil. Also, Isabella Teixeira, our member of the board. She's also here with us. Frank, welcome, and David, and all the new members that have joined. So I'll just share my screen again. So Exchange for Change Brazil, it's consultancy launched in 2015 with a mission to influence the transition to the circular economy in Brazil. We are an independent organization with the idea that we have the flexibility and the capability to talk with all parts of the value chain. We are organized as a network of international experts, so we can co-create and adapt solutions for the Brazilian reality. So just to illustrate a little bit of the events that the ambassador mentioned, I had the opportunity to join the launch of the Netherlands Circular Hotspot event in 2016, when Arjen was the council in Rio de Janeiro. This is the launch of our book that has gathered 42 people, contributed 2 experts. We have Freek and Dajan Jostra. Here's a nice picture taken from the Holland house during the Olympic Games and the event that the Dutch ambassador mentioned. We also had the opportunity to have circular economy in Brazil in an event in partnership with IPT here in São Paulo. And finally, our documentary that we recorded specialists also from the Netherlands and Brazil. The ambassador mentioned about the relationship with SEBRI. We had a really nice event, knowledge exchange, that gathered industry from Brazil and representative from Circle. And I would like to point out, Isabella just mentioned to me yesterday, a really nice report that was launched by the International Resource Panel, highlighting the importance of circular economy to build resilient societies after the pandemic. So business as usual is no longer an option. Opportunities for economic development must include a circular economy business models as a way to generate jobs and reduce material supply dependencies. So this report brings a lot of results demonstrating that we have to rethink the way we generate wealth. So if we grow as an inclusive and sustainable economic society, we can reduce and create more efficiencies in terms of energy and water, 60 to 80%. We can reduce and deliver cost savings around $3 trillion, and we could generate more than 20 million jobs. So circular economy is coming as a really opportunity, as the new normal that we expect as a result of this recovery plan. So the Brazilian Circular Economy Hub is based on international benchmarks. So PACE is one of them, and is a unique ecosystem that ends together key companies from all different parts of the value chain committed to promote the circular economy transition in Brazil. We have 4 areas of work. Our focus is to generate solutions through strategies, alliances, and as a pre-competitive collaboration. We're going to have activities around education, engagement, and communication. And our methodology is very much based on having all the parts of the value chain together, so we can create new integrations, new business models. And we have a step-by-step methodology where we start with an individual assessment, we move on to a value chain analysis, and then we generate several opportunities as a group. So this is just to have an overview of our timeline. Something like that is not built fast. So we had to create this relationship with the members and build the trust and build the commitment that we can achieve great results if we work together. So we are on our second international capacity building webinar. The first one was with Slovenia, and we had people from 15 countries. And what is nice to highlight here is the fact that we have a very good participation of industry. So 39% of the people attended was from industry, which shows us a very good result that industry is coming on board. This is our next webinars. So we are expecting to have one in July to talk about roadmaps, where we're going to exchange results from the Brazilian roadmap to circular economy and also Chile. And we're also planning one in August with Norway to talk about the circularity gap report. So this is our book that is coming soon. And there's also articles from Freik, from Isabella Teixeira. And I would like to thank all the people that contributed to the book. And to finalize, we have launched the documentary, which was filmed in the Netherlands and in Brazil. The idea is to materialize our mission and bring a really good way of demonstrating or presenting what circular economy is about. And I don't know if Silvio and Eduardo is here with us, but I would like to thank them and say that they've done, a brilliant job in this production. So I'll ask Fernando now to show our trailer.
You can stop share, please, Bia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Enquanto muitos se contentam com o ativismo online, o hiperconsumo avança. Extrair, produzir, consumir, descartar.
The phone is worth $1,000 today and €2 of recycled materials 3 years later. We think that's economically rational.
Hoje, a humanidade já está consumindo 70% a mais do que a Terra é capaz de renovar.
Esse sistema, evidentemente, é um sistema suicida. Quando você chega numa escala como a atual, ele é absolutamente catastrófico.
Knowing what we know today, we have to do something. And the best news of the day, that's why I'm so enthusiastic and still an optimist, there is a solution. The solution is a circular economy, circular society.
Um novo modelo econômico propõe mudanças que podem resolver muitos de nossos grandes problemas atuais. Uma transformação que vem de dentro do próprio sistema.
Gradativamente as pessoas começam a se ocupar, a saber habitar um novo tempo, onde as pessoas têm que se deparar com uma nova ética de uma responsabilidade frente às suas escolhas.
For me, circular economy is almost like a system innovation. It's another way of producing, it's another way of consuming, another way of dealing with waste. It's actually another design.
Essa é a grande oportunidade da inovação. Como é que eu pego hoje uma economia que está completamente linearizada e penso de uma maneira criativa e inovadora em como é que ela traz esses materiais para, de fato, entrar em ciclos numa economia circular.
Uma economia circular não gera resíduo, porque ela já é pensada desde o início do desenvolvimento do produto a não ter aquele material que não tem valor. É uma nova forma de você produzir, consumir e se relacionar.
Circularity is about changing the soul of our economy. That's it. So it's about the attitude. It's about the attitude towards everything what makes our life possible.
Um presente à prova de futuro.
Bom, esse é um gostinho aí do nosso filme que a gente agora vai ter que aguardar, né, para passar nos cinemas, ou a gente está tentando ver se a gente consegue liberar o lançamento para a televisão. Ih, estou falando em português. Sorry, I'm speaking in Portuguese. So this is our documentary. We are waiting now to see if we can launch on TV because of the current scenario. But I'm very happy with the result. It's very inspiring. And I would like to invite Freek van Eyck to give us a few words about the Holland Circular Hotspot, and also thank him for all the inspiration and all the learning that I had so far with him. He was the first Dutch expert that I met. And due to the presentation made by Arjen, we connected and we started this knowledge exchange between the Netherlands and Brazil. Oh, you've got the nice picture again. So thank you very much also for being part of our board. And Isabella, thanks for being with us. And please, Freek, welcome.
Bom dia, estou muito feliz que este webinar sobre economia circular está acontecendo. É como oportunidade que exibir compartilhar o caminho que a Holanda tem seguido. Sobretudo, estou feliz em compartilhar as lições aprendidas da maneira mais difícil por meio de erros e acertos para inspirá-los como melhores práticas desenvolvidas por empreendedores holandeses. Como o meu português está pouco enfurado, peço desculpas, mas vou continuar em inglês. Está bem?
Great.
Perfect. Better than my Dutch.
Thank you for having me with you. Let me first, for those who do not know you, introduce my country a little bit. You know, my country is a tiny stamp on the North Sea, 17 million people, but it's the 16th or 17th economy in the world. And, you know, actually the country shouldn't be able to exist because without any dikes, we would have been flooded for 50% since the Middle Ages. So since that time, we had to learn to work together, to collaborate, just to keep our feet dry. And we are early industrialized, we are densely populated, so we always had to work very hard to keep our country very livable and pleasant to live in. And then we don't have any resources, so it makes very much sense for us to keep those resources that we have, to keep them in circulation as much as possible. And we did it typically in the Dutch way, learning by doing. So we have a very good natural fit with circular economy. But as usual, we also started with waste, but we started very early on, something like the end of the 18th century, 1875. We found that the channels of Amsterdam were so polluted that we could not even make beer of it. So we knew we had to act, and it started around health and hygiene. So let's say everything which was valuable was collected by the private sector, and the public sector took up all the waste and brought it to landfills, so 100% recovery. Well, about a century later, we noticed that that wasn't enough, that the landfills were leaking, that the incinerators which we had actually were producing dioxins. The first incinerator in the Netherlands was 1917. So we had to work on environmental standards, environmental protection, landfill capping, gas extraction, etc. But we learned that we could do more. We moved to resource management. So, and at the same time, we went from municipal level to regional level to province level to national level to get more economy of scale. We introduced the polluter pays principle, extended producer responsibility. We had the waste hierarchy, whereas, let's say, landfilling is the least preferred option. And let's say prevention and reuse is one of the best things you can do. And now we even moved on to circular economy. But what does that mean for Brazil? Do we have to wait 150 years before you can start with circular economy? I don't think so, because waste is dealing with the past, and nothing prevents you to keep materials in circulation already today. And you can design for the future, let's say by design, and you can start with that today. Now for us, circular economy is very much about a value concept, value retention. It's, if you see those two hills on the left, if we make products, we combine materials, creativity, labor, energy, and we create value. It's like rolling a ball up in a hill, and then you have created value. And typically what happens at the end of the life, this value rolls down the hill and it's lost forever. Or even worse, you have a negative value, like the plastic soup, for instance. Now, what if we were to retain the value as high as possible on this hill? By sharing, by repairing, and if we cannot repair it, by refurbishing, remanufacturing. And funny, yeah, it's funny saying so, but the last thing in a circular economy, what you want to do is recycling, because as was mentioned also in the introduction of the movie, when you recycle something for a mobile telephone, for instance, you're talking about 2-3 euros. If you refurbish it, it's maybe 200 euros. So value is very important, and you can only do that if you approach it like a system change, another way of designing, producing, using, and dealing with waste. So all new kinds of collaborations. Now for us, I think we have been working for 150 years on waste management, but circular economy really got off, I think, in 2016. It's when the Dutch had the presidency of the European Union. We organized an incoming mission around circular economy. And we were, well, actually, the foreign guests from over, I think, over 20 countries, they opened their eyes, because what you're doing is not normal. That's really unique. Everybody is not only talking about circular economy, they're already doing it. Municipalities, Knowledge Institute, the national government, startups, multinationals. And then we realized we had something good that we should use also as an economic opportunity. And that gave also our government the confidence in 2016, the second half, to really embrace a circular economy vision, to be fully circular in 2050 and to be halfway the use of non-renewable materials in 2030. They got that momentum because the multinationals were working on it with, let's say, they're always forward thinking about future markets, and the startups, the impatient young guys who wanted to have a better world, they were working with it. So they thought this can be an opportunity. And we got the coalition together in 2017, public-private knowledge institutes. It's translated into so-called transition agendas, really action plans for 5 market segments in 2018. Our government approved on it. And then 1 year later, in 2019, 2020, we had an implementation program for, let's say, these transition programs. And the funny thing is, if you look at the bottom line of this graph, at the same time, Brazil has always been very central, because who was there in 2016 with the Netherlands Circular Hotspot campaign, the incoming trade mission? That was Beatrice. And as the ambassador, Kees van Rij said, let's say we kept the momentum going. We introduced trade missions about urban health and let's say circular cities in that period. We were present in Rio during the Olympic Games. We collaborated to write a book together. And then the space was limited. We had the Circo design courses and we worked on the video. And a second book is about to come up. So Brazil has always been our partner in this travel, and we would love to collaborate with you, because please remember, it makes no sense to make a circular island of the Netherlands if the rest of the world goes down the drain. We need you to be circular. You are our partners, our friends. We cannot save the planet alone. We need you. Now, I have some slides about the policy aspects of the government and some slides about companies. And as I said, our government really has a moonshot. They want to be really circular in 2050. I think it's an amazing ambition. Frankly speaking, I don't think they will get there, but we'll get very close to it, because it's really inspirational. It's binding, it's inspirational. But a vision is not enough. You need to have some focus areas, then industry can follow. So we have 5 transition agendas: biomass and food, very important also for Brazil; plastics, important everywhere; manufacturing industry, the construction sector, and consumer goods. Roughly speaking, 80% of impact. But just these 5 sectors as focus area is not enough, because you need to tweak the system. You need to think about legislation and regulation. You need to think about the carrot and the stick, or intelligent market incentives. And as circular economy has higher costs up front, you need to, let's say, think about access to financing. So because the total cost of ownership is much better, but the system, financial system is not geared to it. So we have to work on that as well. It's also about behavior aspects, that our behavior, how we buy, how we throw away waste is following. It's about setting the right priorities for the future for R&D. At this moment, for instance, textile is very hot in the Netherlands, but also chemical recycling is very hot. And it's about international collaboration. And that's us. Now, what we learned also from our foreign friends is that however important the government is, they cannot do it alone. A city, for instance, has only impact in its footprint for maybe 5%. For the rest, they need public, the private sector. Entrepreneurs will be the main actors, because they show guts, they take risks, they invest, they accelerate. And if you see this picture on your upper right, that's the former CEO of DSM. He said something really funny. He said, how can we claim to be successful in a society that fails? And he is right, because if there is no future market if we all fail. So it's in their interest to act now. Think about it. R&D typically takes 2 years in a multinational. Permitting takes maybe 1 year. You have to build a plant, and then your plant is in operation for 20 years, refurbishing 30 years. So you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that in 20 years from now, there will be a higher carbon price, that sustainability will be more important, that, let's say, the environmental impact will be absorbed in the price. So you have to anticipate now. And think about it from business perspective. Look about platform models, how they created more revenue. And if you give something a second, a third, or a fourth life, like your phone, you get more value from the same amount of materials. And if you're all talking together in your value chain, you communicate, you're aware, you can anticipate, it's about less risk. And the first step, for instance, creating less waste or losing less materials, it's less cost. So actually, it's a no-brainer to go down this road, but it asks for some courage, because it's a transition. And first movers, they run into all the difficult transition steps and the biggest hurdles, but they have most market to gain. Now, this is some pictures about transitioning towards a circular economy. And if you look at the picture on the right, you will see that at the same time you have to build up something you desire, something circular. At the same time, you also have to break down an old system which you don't want anymore, like coal-fired power plants, for instance. And you have to give those guys the time to adapt, to transform. Otherwise, they will create lots of resistance, and they have some influence in the present economy. Now, if you look at the middle picture, you will see that most companies realize that business as usual is not an option. Think about the Volkswagen emission scandal or the Chinese baby milk scandal. So you have to act, and you can start with dealing with resources. So better waste management, more resource efficiency. But if you stay there, then probably you will lose out again, because all these smart new startups will come with new platform models. So you have to work towards new circular economy models and keep on moving, learning by doing, learn fast, fail fast, we always says in the Netherlands. And then if you look at these lower, let's say, circles on the ground, you often start with a small transition team, like the Brazilian Circular Economy Hub. You have a transition coalition, then you initiate projects. And from these projects, you get success, and that creates new projects. You create change networks, and that's how the ball gets moving. And actually, that's what we're trying to do as the Netherlands. We are maybe 8% circular at the moment. Maybe we have 12% recycled in our products, which make us a leader. But actually, we're also at the beginning. But we like to keep the momentum. Now, one of the things we say to companies is, so it's good to start with waste and to look at resources, but you have to think beyond the horizon, to think about new business models, like prioritize renewable inputs. And you see some pictures on your right side, let's say in the top line. For instance, you can regain phosphate from the sewer system. And that's very strategic. We are an agricultural superpower, but we don't have phosphate mines not in the Netherlands, not in Europe. The challenge here, for instance, is not so much technology, but it's regulation, because it's about bringing waste back into the system. Recovered phosphate is about the soil regulation, fertilizer regulation, waste regulation. That's the real challenge here. Now, it's not only at the beginning, like renewable inputs, it's also about keeping products in the loop as long as possible. Think about Signify, light as a service, or the sharing models for the cars. And of course, there's the end of the value chain in gray at the bottom line, like Philips Healthcare is remanufacturing medical scanners. That's a good thing to do, because they might cost far less than new scanners, and there is a huge growing healthcare market in the world. So just some examples that it's very important to think in business models, to educate about business models, to show best practices, and to smart small pilots that can scale up. Now then, a little bit about us. We are Holland Circular Hotspot. We try to make circular economy happen, especially at the international level. We have lots of programs at the national level. I was part of them as well. And now we like to work at the international level, because as you know, resource value chains are international and we need each other there. So we try to exchange best practices, create mutual business opportunities, and share knowledge, and in bottom line, have an impact with the societal goals by going circular. Some things that we do, I pointed out that we have the 5 transition agendas, and that means that we have over 100 best practices in agri-food, in plastics, in manufacturing, which we'd like to share. The lessons learned, how to finance this, the failures as well, because you can learn a lot from them, and we gladly share them with you as well. We also have an overview of the, let's say, the knowledge network, the who is who, which are our bio-based professors, where's the expertise in circular economy, which tools we have for circular cities, etc. And we also share the lessons of our government on extended producer responsibility, on public procurement, on design lessons, on green deals, because they are enablers. They're very important as well. They give direction and they set the boundary conditions. We noticed that we are really fond of circular economy. Lots of places that's sometimes different. It's more about waste management. It's more about climate change or SDGs. So we try to make the link to these topics by together with experts from our network. We write reports and we link circular economy to the city. our circular economy to the SDGs, as Beatrice pointed out, because circular economy is important and can be a solution, not as a cost, but as a business model. We're now working on specials on circular economy in textiles, circular economy in agro-food, and circular economy and water. So we hope to be able to provide them to you second half of this year. Well, what's very important that we can't do it alone. So we try to create a network of friends. In Europe, we have quite a lot, but there's also in other places of the world. And we can learn a lot from Brazil. We can learn a lot from Australia. We can learn from the Taiwanese, from our European friends. And by sharing, we can go much faster together. And so we're really happy that we can work with you guys and girls in Brazil to learn from you and to help you as well to, let's say, to leapfrog. Now, maybe some closing words on what I see happening right now, because we are in a very unusual situation and the impact of COVID-19. We see that lots of, let's say, initiatives have been cancelled. The Olympic Games, the World Circular Economy Forum, the Dubai Expo, the climate conference. We see the firefighters as multinationals stepping in, cutting costs. Let's say, not making travels anymore, only looking at non-essential costs. We see small entrepreneurs who just started to be successful in great difficulty because they don't have much buffers. They're in survival mode, and the public has some budgets, but they're being repurposed this year. Now, for us, we think actually that although the short time it might be very difficult, the long term is better than ever for circular economy. Supply lines will be shorter, more resilience, closer to home. You see that people after lockdown more appreciate healthy food, clean air, they like cycling. So I think there will also be consumer pressures. And as resilience is important, I think that also, let's say, the institutional investors will put pressures to companies. So now is the time to act, now is the time to think big, now there's the time to deliver at scale. And nobody can do it alone. So my favorite closure is always, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And I hope we can do this together. So thank you, Beatrice. Back to you.
Fantastic. Very nice. Very nice to see all the progress that is being made and the opportunities around circular economy. And thanks also for this continuous learning and partnership. I'm certain that we can do great things inspired by the Netherlands, by the Slovenian and all the other European countries. So I would like to invite David McGinty to join us now. Thank you very much, David, for being here with us. PACE, the platform for accelerating circular economy, has been one of our benchmarks. You've been running the PACE for much longer than us, so it'll be a pleasure to know more how it has been created, you know, the opportunities, the projects, and also learnings that we can bring to the Brazilian markets and the Brazilian companies. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'll keep my kind of presentation a little bit shorter and then leave it to your questions, because I'm sure there are a lot building up here. So one, just an acknowledgement that.
Oh, you pressed mute, David.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, I was just saying that first, just a note that we're based in the Netherlands, and the Minister of Infrastructure is on our. Honey, I'm sorry, children. Opal.
That's never a problem.
I'm sorry.
It's the good energy that we have. We always attract kids. Don't worry.
Circular.
This might take a minute. That's a 3-year-old, so it's going to be intense. All right. She looked very good in a little bathing suit with a hat on. So anyway, we're in the Netherlands, and one of our board members is Stintje van Veldhoven, the State Secretary for Infrastructure and Water in the Netherlands. So just want to acknowledge that up front, that there's also a tone here, an undercurrent of Brazilian-Dutch collaboration. But PACE itself is a coalition of around 100 CEOs and ministers who we really talk about being the champions of the circular economy movement. So these are leaders globally who want to who are kind of in a lot of ways themselves out in front of their own organization strategies, and their organizations and countries are a little bit ahead of their peers and others. So the reason that we came into existence was, and I think this can maybe help inform where you all want to go in Brazil and how you fit in. The reason we came into existence was in the beginning, I call it usually phase one, there was a coalition of CEOs who were early movers like DSM, who was mentioned earlier by Frick. And they were really looking at what they were going to do around resource efficiency. They were looking at risk and waste management issues, how to meet, some were responding to consumer demands around recyclability and recycled content. And through the World Economic Forum, they posed a series of questions, and the World Economic Forum brought in Bill McDonough, who wrote Cradle to Cradle, and McKinsey, who was a consulting partner with them, and asked Bill and McKinsey to kind of come up with some standard responses to those CEO issues. So I would say one lesson learned is ad initio, while PACE had to start somewhere, you have to start with some constituency's basic problem. And that basic problem was a business problem with a small set of companies, but really starting out with what high level big issues needed to be tackled. That evolved a little bit. That same group was also the beginning of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So these organizations, PACE, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and others have kind of the same genesis a few years ago. But what began to come out of that was a series of papers, first on making the economic case for a circular transition. You know, if you can't make the economic case, businesses won't move in or even explore. So I think that was, in retrospect, a really smart move. And I think is an encouraging move we see in some countries. Some start with kind of understanding resource flows, but even before you start to understand your materials and their impact, knowing that there's an economic opportunity there for companies so that they can then bring in the governments as well. And so first was making the economic case. The second was a response to plastic waste, both a positive proactive response and a reactive response by the companies. That evolved into the next area they wanted to look at were rare earth minerals and electronics. And that began a series of processes. So that first phase for PACE was really CEOs name a problem, civil society and consultants come in, address that issue and make some recommendations. And then the CEOs go back and take action really on their own or in some small cohorts. The second phase is really where we began to pivot in 2018, and actually where I came into to PACE, was saying that, you know, there was an increasing awareness around circularity, increasing adoption a lot in Europe and China and some other countries. There, you would say there were hotspots where action was coming up, but there was a little bit of an issue of piloting, and a lot of the companies were identifying that while they could test a new business model, they couldn't take it to global scale. And there were a few business model innovations that were needed, as well as innovations and developments on the policy side. So the call really became to take this cohort of civil society, public, and the private sector leaders who had emerged, name critical issues that had to be addressed, put demonstration projects around those priority issues, and then make that kind of a cycle. So that's how PACE really runs today. We run on a series of calls to action that are developed and endorsed by this coalition of leaders. We put demonstrations in place, not because we run projects, they're all run by other people. The point of those is to produce the evidence to inform leaders to take bigger and bolder action. So it's one play in the transition that's required. It is the kind of diplomacy side and action orientation side of the work. So just to give you a couple of examples of issues that come up that we're facing now, where we're looking at global action and big scale commitment is needed. One is on trade and secondary materials. So there's a lot of inconsistent regulations on being able to move materials from the country of manufacture and use back to the country of reuse and remanufacture. And that is a barrier to both building the supplies and stocks that are needed to use recycled material in new products, as well as to actually have the most efficient supply chains that are working. So if we don't solve that issue, we find that there's not going to be an ability for companies, which almost every company now is a multilateral company, if not a global company, because of their supply chains. The second is around taxes and incentives, which can enable and support the move to different materials, as well as supporting the use of secondary materials. And a broader discussion about how government procurement plays a role in sending market signals and incorporating circular principles, as well as looking at a little bit more progressive systemic changes like shifting taxes from labor to materials or consumption. And then the third, I would say, is around supply chain transparency, where in order to enable a circular economy, you have to know what materials are coming in and out of your company or geography, whether that's a country, region, city, whatever it is. And therefore, you need to have transparency about what people are buying. Consumers need to be aware of what they're purchasing. So you would look at business model innovations and policy innovations, like using things called like product passports or other things. And maybe just a note here, because the orientation of the discussion is really about corporations, just a note on what types of demonstrations of partnerships we see being very effective. One I call non-competitive partnerships, meaning you take companies that are in disparate industries around a specific problem. So an example there, Frank mentioned Philips and some other companies who are participating in this. It's called the Capital Equipment Coalition. It's a group of companies that, one in healthcare, one in infrastructure, equipment, kind of construction equipment, et cetera. And they're coming together to look at business models around reverse supply chain logistics. They can have open discussions. They know they're never going to compete head to head. And it's given them a place to move forward and progress their internal strategies without the kind of competitive fears. The second is what I call pre-competitive. So these are companies that could compete if the solutions work, but there's a need for them to work together on specific issues. And an example there is our new vision for electronics, or our circular electronics platform, which is a group of, in part, consumer electronics companies who all make directly competitive devices, but if they don't solve some critical problems together, they themselves can't meet their customer demand. So that would be like, say, on the enabling the flow of certain types of minerals or products. The third is competitive but collaborative projects or partners. So there, the Global Plastics Action Partnership, you'll see Pepsi and Coca-Cola actually working side by side. Why? Because they have a joint interest in solving plastic waste issues, both for their customers and their own supply chains. And so they've agreed to co-finance and collaborate very openly. They'll compete on soda, but not compete on plastic. And it's because they both win if a solution's found. And the final model is around more platforms, which are about profiling. And that'll kind of lead me to my last point, and I'll stop, which is that once you start to work on all these different issues and start to get input, you start to see some very common kind of cross-cutting issues popping out. And so where we're at in the circular economy kind of movement globally is really looking at both big shifts that are required, as well as opportunities to mainstream circularity, so it doesn't stay a niche issue. Say niche in your company, niche in your country, and niche globally. So one is, and we see this being something that's really emerged intensely in the last year, and we think it will continue for the next 2 years at least, is linking circular economy to the climate agenda and investments that are happening there, both in companies and countries. The second is links between circular economy and healthcare. And the final, I would say, is around regional action. And there's an emerging group of coalitions of some of countries, some of government, some of civil society groups, and we're like these hot spots in Africa, Latin America, and the European Union. And so we're here to enable and create more strengthen institutions to enable the transition. So thanks a lot, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, David. I think for me, it's very nice to see when you say that it's competitive but collaborative. So it seems that there is a trend and an urgent need for companies to get together and work together. And I just want to point out 2 points that you mentioned. When you said that space will provide evidence to inform leaders of the benefits of the transition. So I think this is very important as well, education, knowledge, information for the companies to feel that there is actually, opportunities, create a narrative. And this is something that we've been reading a lot and learning from all of you, and that we want to bring to the Brazilian market. And also when you talk about secondary materials, creating the market, we have Nespresso here as a member of the hub, and they've just launched the first capsules, coffee capsules, made out of 80% of recycled aluminum. So I think this is really interesting, and we're going to have the head of innovation, Christoph, with us on our next international webinar, talking a little bit about how they are buying this recycled material, guarantee that there is performance, quality, and they are creating, what I've learned a lot from the Netherlands, the market pull is very important rather than the market push. So we have several questions here. I think I'm going to start with one to Freek. The questions go around the coronavirus crisis, governments and how to get on board. But let's start from Yuri Takigawa from Flex. The coronavirus crisis has demonstrated the vulnerability of the old supply chain model, with companies finding their operations abruptly halted because of a single factory had to shut down. What do you think about it? Integrations of supply chain and resilience. You have your microphone on mute.
You're quite right. Apologies. No, that's an interesting question. And indeed, in COVID-19 times, one which is a hot topic. We had several surveys in the Netherlands about the impact of COVID-19 on companies in various sectors. And indeed, this rupture of supply chains is definitely one of them. And you already see now that there is a need for more resilience. For instance, one example mentioned in the newspaper is that 90% of the spices that Unilever uses in its ice creams, they actually come from India. So 90%, that's a huge dependency, for instance. So in all this, it makes sense to, of course, to have more suppliers, but also suppliers closer to home where the risk is less. And if you think about it, why wouldn't you go to alternatives which offer more security, like bio-based alternatives or circular alternatives, use recyclate, where you can close your loop. So the pressure to build more resilience in your supply chain is definitely very actual. We have various small companies who saw this coming in January, February, and immediately they changed their, let's say, their business process. Some companies that were normally producing chairs, they also offered, let's say, refurbished chairs, remanufactured chairs, because there's no supply chain risk there, because you have the old chairs and you upgrade them again, you manufacture them, and that you can do also in times of crisis. So there's a lot to say for products as a service as well in times of a crisis, where you don't have this rupture. So that is a first answer. And maybe as an example, we heard last week from the Dutch chemical company DSM that they increased also their circular economy targets. For instance, for their resins, they have a 30% circularity target. When we were in the middle of the Corona crisis, you saw that Dutch Anglo oil company Shell, they increased their climate ambitions while the oil price was at their lowest point ever. So you see that companies keep up their, let's say, their green ambitions. And I don't think that, for instance, the packaging companies, the Coca-Colas, the Unilevers, they will retreat from, let's say, their commitment at the World Economic Forum about bio-based or recycled or recyclable packaging. I think that's definitely there to stay. So back to you, Bei.
Yeah. Yeah, so can we say that product design, reuse, and recycling could be elements to prevent this disruption?
Definitely, yes. Definitely, not just the 9 hours, not just the 1 hour of recycling. We have 9 hours, no, in the circular economy.
Yeah, I think there's a moment to rethink products, services. A little taster of our book. We received an article from Professor Walter Stahel. And on his article, he says that what matters after this coronavirus is stocks, not just flows. So this is the true economic. You know, the companies that have managed to have quality and quantities of stocks are the companies that are going through this crisis, you know, stronger. But watch out. We also have a question here, maybe to David, because there is an element in PACE about public-private relationship, right? And how do you liaise with the government? So how can we work and influence governments to consider circular economy as a key driver, especially after the coronavirus, to restart the economy in a different way, if they are not on board yet? And maybe Freek can also complement. He has been around the world promoting circular economy. What about countries that are not around the European scenario? How can we talk with the government?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's an incredibly complex issue. So I'll start with something we realized when the pandemic really hit. So a lot of the real leaders in circular economy, when I say there's a need to mainstream, what I mean is there's kind of a community that talks to itself. So it's great to build things like communities because you build resilience, a lot of sharing, and you can scale up. But if you're only talking to yourselves, then you're not influencing people in different markets. And what we realized was kind of looking across a lot of our partners that when it came to influencing a response, so let's say the links of circular economy and healthcare, there wasn't really a strong link. There was an anecdotal connection, but not an existing evidence-based connection. So if you wanted to engage with the Ministry of Health, the recommendations, you were really starting relationships ad initio in the middle of a crisis. The second was that depending on the countries, the government parties that hold this agenda are quite different. This is no different than any other issue, but you've got ministries of trade, you've got foreign affairs in some countries really own the agenda. Some it's whoever owns the climate agenda. Others it's more infrastructure because it starts as a recycling or waste management topic. So what I would just say is, because the pandemic is already here, so we're already in the midst of a crisis, so no point in looking backwards too much. I would say really think about who you're going to try to influence and who has both the policy controls and who has the funding. And those can be quite different. And in a lot of countries, the technician sits in one ministry, the policymaker sits in another, and the purse is with another. And really being willing to step into that complexity is critically important when you want to engage on a circular agenda, because it is multifaceted. And just maybe a final point, which is some real specifics. Depending on different countries where they're at in this agenda, there's plenty of room and discussion, I would say pretty consistently across our engagements in Europe, Latin America, Africa, Asia, et cetera, that there's a call for there's long been a call for investments in infrastructure for recycling. That's ubiquitous and people agree on it. So meaning it doesn't matter whether you think plastic production increasing year on year is good or bad, you still need recycling, and you need more innovative recycling methods. You need a combination of mechanical and chemical recycling and other things. So I think it's pretty simple to talk to any government anywhere about increased recycling rates and the infrastructure that's needed to be in place, as well as community awareness to actually recycle their materials. The second is this issue on trade. Because supply chains are at risk, it's relatively easy to talk about supply chains also for virgin materials as well as secondary materials. So that's actually been a quite nice opening of space to give some momentum behind some of the recommendations that were already there in circularity. And then just maybe a final point, and this is, I'm probably preaching to the choir a little bit in this statement, which is in circular economy, there can be a push towards localization. So, you know, you look at local consumption, local production, and you try to close the loops as tight, and people say as local as possible. But the reality is, like I said earlier, it's hard to think of any business that is truly localized. They don't have some dependency on trade. And therefore, and also they have some dependency on other sectors. So whether it's a municipal government or national or even a regional body. So what I would say is that this is a moment to really call for multilateralism and not to back down from the positive sides of globalization. And getting that balance right, we frame it a lot of times as glocalization. So what's that right optimized economy for your country as well as the world that balances global dependencies and efficiency with localization and local consumption?
Thank you very much, David. It's not a simple, easy move, right? but
worthwhile.
Yes, and on our last webinar with Ladea Godina, she mentioned that there is a role for one person who is the orchestrator, you know, the person that is going to have this ability to talk with all players, industry, government, and really facilitate this communication and getting the common grounds. So we have, I have two more questions, and then I think we're gonna have to come to a close. The first question, Freek, do you want to add anything to that?
You asked me about some experience, to share some experiences.
Yes.
Because, somehow I tend to travel a little bit. No, let's say you see some countries who I would say have an economic need to think about circular economy. Think about countries like Japan or Taiwan, major economical powers, industrial powers, but actually no access to resources. I think Japan especially woke up after Fukushima. It makes sense for them to turn circular because they have a huge dependency to keep on going. Taiwan might be a small island, maybe in size similar to the Netherlands, but it's a 20th economy in the world. And in, let's say, the IT, the chip world, they are one of the biggest players. And when at national level, the economy was not that competitive anymore, they went to, let's say, to other countries to invest there. But they have to be very careful, let's say, otherwise the Taiwan home base will not be competitive anymore. So they have all the elements in Taiwan, for instance. They adopt circular economy, but in silos. They miss the cement between the bricks, if I may say so. So they work on the public side, they work on the private side, but maybe not so much together. So that's what they're missing there. If I look to Africa, I see that, let's say, circular economy has always been there. Circular economy is not new. The old traditional farm was circular. A telephone in Africa on average gets maybe 8-9 lives. We often forget that, and then we only talk about the e-waste dumps, which are terrible, by the way. It's a poor man's circular economy, but rudimentary. There's lots of potential for circular economy. Low down, bottom up, private sector development, and a huge growing market which has a need maybe for functional materials, but they do not have to be the newest ones. Then there are a group of countries in which I also, no offense meant, I think Brazil is part of that, which are countries like Australia, Canada, Brazil, which have lots of natural resources, but they squander their wealth. They export lots of natural richness and mineral richness without adding value. And at the same time, they face the negative consequences of, for instance, waste management, of mining. And I think they have the biggest opportunity. It's too crazy for words that the Dutch are the second largest exporter of agro-food in the world after the States. It should be Brazil, no, with what you've got. So there's so much low-hanging fruit to work with in agro-food, in processing, in metallurgy, what you can work with. I wish we had the potential Brazil has in a way. Then you have countries like China. Of course, for China, circular economy is very hot. They have these 5 years plans, and for them, it's actually about growing, keep on growing like mad, but without the negative side effects, let's say soil pollution, air pollution, water pollution. So the need for circular economy is everywhere. And you see the momentum is sometimes public, sometimes private, sometimes small, but it's everywhere. And we need to connect it because as we have seen, the awareness of the dependency has never been stronger than now. So the momentum is there. Back to you, B.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn, and I think having this knowledge exchange conversations, we can kind of build the puzzle with all these different parts. We have a question about education and the role of entrepreneurs in circular economy. Freek, you mentioned that they are key to provoke this new mindset. What are the main tools and instruments to power their development, apart from connecting them with academies, scientific communities? And also, if a company decides to go in this direction, do you think that they require new staff or new kind of managers? How to change the organization's mindset for the circular transition?
Okay, quite some questions. Let me start with education. Well, we often joke that, let's say, people over 40 cannot be educated anymore, but you can educate the kids and they can put pressure to their parents. And they are the consumers of tomorrow. They are the new CEOs of tomorrow, the leaders of tomorrow. So it's very tough to reach, let's say, maybe the people in power even today, but you can reach the kids at schools. So what the Dutch will do is that they make circular economy obligatory in the curriculum of schools. Primary schools, secondary schools, universities, and I think that's a good thing that you create awareness at this moment. And the people that grow up in that way, they don't only think about making money, but they also think about, let's say, how all things are connected and that we only have a future if our planet has a future. So I think that's very important. And that starts maybe by learning young kids at school with projects, how they should deal with waste, why it's important, how you can collect it, and that you see the results. But it's also about how to consume, how to buy things and offering them alternatives. Education is not only about creating awareness, but also offering an alternative. Now, if you want to separate your waste, you have a willingness, but if there's no infrastructure, then it doesn't work. And it's not only about the infrastructure, you should also have a communication and you should make it cool to recycle. You should make it hot and hip, like gamifying it. Then it starts actually to work. And what you sometimes see in the bigger companies that, let's say, they know that they are a little bit slow because of the processes, they are too big and they have these procedures and governance, but by working together with the fast companies, the startups, you can see actually that they, let's say, the time to market gets much faster. So let's say the slow, they basically work together with the fast and then they can adopt it. So you see, for instance, the Dutch multinationals, they're very active with the startup scenes, very active with the innovation awards, because it's for them an eye on the market to see what's there. And then they try to bind them to themselves, to absorb them and to take their ideas, to collaborate with them. So that's an idea. And I think in Holland, we are, because we're working on, for instance, keeping our feet dry since the Middle Ages, that it's not only about technology. It's maybe 20% of the game. It's about social innovation. So you need to deal kinds of different skill sets. You need to understand the other one. You need to communicate. And I think that makes a difference. So creating diversity, it's like nature, no? Nature, when there is a forest fire, nature doesn't rebuild the old forest. It makes a new equilibrium. So you need diversity in a company to always adapt to the new situation. So let me start by saying this.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. On our last meeting of the hub, we had FINEP and SENAI, two institutions that provide funding for innovation projects in Brazil. And one point of the discussion was kind of around this theme. You know, we might have the technology, we might have the funding, but we need the right people in place and the right project structured, all the players, and this systemic coalition in order for the project to be successful. So yeah, thank you. I'm trying to merge here some of the questions, and I will just find two questions, one for the David, and then I will ask David to give his final remarks, and one for open to Freek, and maybe the Dutch ambassador might want to comment on. So David, we talked about the need to understand the mindset, the education. So what are the key motivations for the businesses to join PACE? Do you think that this could be one of the elements? What do you recommend for, you know, what's your message for the Brazilian companies? And what are the biggest challenges for the industries or for PACE enabling the implementation of circularity?
Sure, I think I can answer some of that, but not all of it. One, I would say there's a need for a few different strategies, and they don't have to be, I would recommend there's a need for multiple strategies. And PACE is really a coalition of believers. So, you know, we're pulling together champions who, they're executives. We don't have to convince them about circularity. We don't have to educate them about it. They might face internal issues on how to diffuse and educate different elements of their teams, but generally either their head of innovation, R&D, the head of their procurement, head of sustainability, the CEO's bought in and they've got a champion, or the minister's bought in and they've got someone at the director general level and even below who's there with them behind it. And they've got, you know, money behind it, targets, all that sort of stuff. So there's a room, and I think each country, for that type of coalition to start showing the way for other partners. And I would be picking, we try to pick companies who are leading in each kind of critical material or industry with countries who are leading in those different areas around the actions we want. So you're picking the issue and the topic, and then you're picking the champions around those. There's a whole nother world that is that activation of both kind of not even laggards, but kind of the early majority in innovation talk, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. There are plays there, as well as plays for disruptors. And I think mixing those all together and trying to serve all those audiences will really confuse an organization's mission. I would say it's better to specialize. And so then when you get really to education, we really use peer-to-peer education. So our point is, if we need to, I can give an example of the G20, what's happening right now. If this is public information, so this year the G20 is hosted by Saudi Arabia. Last year the G20 was hosted by Japan. So our key is not to come in and preach to the Saudi government or to the governments that are hosting, but to bring in their peers to have a conversation about what worked in past sessions, what's working in the working groups, bring in those thought leaders around them, and show that there's actually some safety in moving forward. So corporate CEOs want that as well. And that's what we find to be the effective method for influencing change is staying very positive. The great thing about circular economy is it's a very positive story. When you stay on the economic opportunities, the potential to contribute to positive climate action in a way that is economically viable. And we really keep it as a forward-looking discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Let's stay positive and let's build a coalition of believers. I love that. Thank you very much. And I guess we've gone beyond the time, but it's been an incredible debate. I will just make a few points, one last point around trade interests and government role and international collaboration. Freek and maybe the Dutch ambassador can comment. How do we consider trade interest between countries in the transition from the circular to the circular economy, and especially now this current scenario, and how multinational companies could lead the model in this context? And perhaps there is something, it's important to point out, the Brazilian hub, there is no intention to work on pushing public policy. Our role is to gather the business, the believers, the champions, the companies, and help them and assist them in creating this systemic projects, and with the results, creating a baseline and arguments that can be useful for policy development. But that's not the main role of the hub. So I guess this international collaboration and this discussion could assess and help on this type of discussion around policy development. What's your take on that, Freek?
Okay, just some short reflections before I gladly give over the floor to our ambassador. In the Netherlands, I think the movement started with the multinationals who are forward-looking, like I said in my presentation, because it's about future markets and they know, let's say, they will have to react. Some of the largest multinationals are always some of the contributors to the plastic soup, for instance. So it can also be a liability in the future. You have to act, you have to be a force for good instead of be part of the problem. The other force for change were the startups, let's say the impatient young generation who wanted to change. So if you see that there is this kind of movement in your society, and I think I have also seen very enthusiastic startups in Brazil. If you see this as a government, then you know that you have a potential there, an opportunity. And that if you facilitate them to a direction which is inevitable, you're one of the first movers, you have the biggest market potentials. For the Netherlands, of course, it's a no-brainer. We are very dependent of, let's say, international value chain of trade. And by adopting it very fast, we create more opportunities. It's the new slogan of the Netherlands, is co-creating, pioneering solutions to global challenges. And we'd love to be a first mover, share our innovations with the world, and let's say in part also create new economic opportunities. So I think it's, in the end, you need government to give direction, to create the boundary conditions. Take something simple as waste management. Waste is like water, it goes to the lowest point. And if there's no regulation or there is no enforcement, it will keep going to the lowest point. So in the end, you have to facilitate it. And if you have brilliant business initiatives, but you keep rewarding the bad principles and not, let's say, the bad ideas and not the good ones, then let's say you don't get the transition you might want and you miss out on the opportunities. So for me, I think if you think carefully, it's about opportunity for the future, and the cost of not acting for a country will be far, far, far higher. So you have to work on the regulatory level as well, or make it happen. Maybe the momentum is not there yet, but then make sure that the government, like they did in the Netherlands, says, hey, we're missing out of business opportunities, let's facilitate them. Back to the ambassador, maybe.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for a fascinating debate and interesting information that you have provided with us. The three speakers, I should say, Beatrice and David and Freek. Again, for me, a meeting like this is useful when at the end of the meeting, I know a little bit more than I knew before, and that's definitely the case. Now, on the issue of trade interest, as was asked, well, the only thing I can say here is that our focus on circular economy, circular agriculture, and building on these models and and stimulus that is coming from also the private sector in the Netherlands. Of course, the government of the Netherlands is following very much in this line. We have agreed, after all, less than a year ago, this huge Green Deal in the Netherlands with the aims that I think Freek pointed to in the very beginning of his intervention, that by 2050 we want to be very close to CO2 neutral, and we want to have a circular economy, and taking all the steps now with in a combined fashion. You know, it's built. I think a little bit earlier it was mentioned how important these technical and business models are, but in the end it's all about governance. It's about how people work together, and I think you pointed out the issue that we have this common enemy called the water, which doesn't make any difference between whether you're rich or poor. If the water floods you, you know, you can only do one thing, that is that everybody works together. And this is very much, I think, in the DNA of our country, of our government, of our citizens, who build these types of coalitions. Now, we have to build them internationally, and that's what we're doing, and that's what we want to do, in my particular case here, also with Brazil. And we have, I would say, a good starting position to build those types of coalitions with Brazil. Of course, in the private sector in Brazil, in think tanks like this, in activities, we see a growing interest. But we also see a discussion in Brazil, maybe not very visible yet, but that if we don't join this type of discussion and leading to new ways of doing business in the future, we may miss out. You continuously believe that only by exporting raw materials you will survive economically. And I think also there is a growing consciousness of that in this fascinating country with its enormous possibilities. The Netherlands has a pretty strong footprint in this country. We have all the major Dutch companies that you can think of are active in Brazil, and some of them for over 100 years. Now, of course, many of them are active in the traditional economy, but we see also through our networks, for instance, through Dutcham and the relationship with our companies, that there is a growing interest in moving in these new, let's say, these new approaches that we are currently also discussing here. The formal framework that, of course, we have a bilateral cooperation framework with Brazil. It covers many, many areas. We have, of course, the framework of the OECD, which Brazil is trying to become a member. And the growing consensus in the OECD is also we have to work in these new solutions. And that obviously will also help Brazil in its internal discussion to move in that direction. There is the EU-Mercosur trade agreement that has been negotiated now between the European Union Commission and the Mercosur countries. This treaty will now be proposed to all the member states to be, after proposal of the European Commission, in Europe at least, will be discussed by each of the governments, and then will have to be voted for ratification in our parliaments. Now, part of that a fantastic, very advanced trade agreement, of course, deals with these interests as well. It deals with the conditions of the Paris Agreement on climate change. It deals with sustainability. It deals with all these issues that we are presently discussing. So, and it may be of some interest to also to mention here that very recently, and that's quite unheard of in Europe, that there was an agreement between the French and Dutch government through the trade ministers that we have aligned our positions on conditions pertaining to sustainability in international trade agreements. Now, traditionally, France and the Netherlands were always quite separate. France having a little bit more protectionist tendency, more state-oriented tendency, whereas the Netherlands is more company and free market oriented and free trade. But they've come together now in saying, well, we have to make steps in putting additional conditions, or at least strong conditions also in international trade agreements when it comes to the issue of sustainability and all these, well, everything that deals with the discussion we are having today. So there are definitely interesting things that are changing here, and there are very good opportunities to work in concrete projects with Brazilian partners, between Brazil and the Netherlands, and I suppose with Brazil and other countries that are like-minded to ours, because as was said, this is too big just for one or two countries. This is an issue that obviously we have to work all together. And I'm very glad again here that my Slovenian ambassador Gorac is also joining here, because he and I discussed this issue. We also want to work together here in Brazil with the upcoming Slovenian presidency of the European Union to see if we can help and to build on this huge coalition also with Brazil. On startups, I'm very happy to also mention here that we have organized a number of events with startups in Brazil, in Recife, in Belo Horizonte, and other places where we brought together startup people from the Netherlands and startup people from those cities here in Brazil. Very promising, very interesting. It's all about creating networks, because in the end, of course, investments are important, regulation is very important, but I think still the most important is that you bring like-minded people together who can exchange experience, inspire themselves, and maybe work together. But it all begins with networks, it begins with, and in the end, with governance. It's all about people. I think there are countries without any natural resources, and they're very successful. And it's usually because they have good governance. They are predictable, they don't have a stop-and-go decision-making system, they are predictable, and they have solid legislation that gives the assurances of investors that it's good to work with those countries. And there are countries with huge natural resources and that are a mess. I'm not going to mention specific cases, but in the end, and that's the lesson that I take from my experiences working abroad most of my life, is that in the end, it's all about governance. It's all about networks. It's about people working and talking together, learning from each other, not imposing, but trying to find common solutions, because that's the only way to move forward. On that slightly philosophical note, I would like to give the floor back to Beatrice. Thank you very much for me and all the others participating in this fascinating event. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We've gone beyond our time, but I could not stop that debate because it was incredible and inspirational. And I think that's what we seek here. I do believe on knowledge exchange and international collaboration. We need leaders, we need people to inspire, we need best practices. And I really like when you say about creating networks, bringing like-minded people together, and governance. That's exactly the spirit of the hub. We want to bring like-minded people and companies that want to learn together how to make this transition work for Brazil. And we do need the international experts bringing solutions, bringing expertise, bringing technology, and also the multinational companies that have their strategy very much towards circularity in Europe, for example, but still have to bring that knowledge to the Brazilian counterparts. So I think I will come now to a close. I will ask all the Brazilian participants to remain online because we still have some more information to the Brazilian audience with the next steps of the hub and some highlights from our members. So I thank you all and speak soon.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. See you soon. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, David.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Freek and Wanda and Kees. I will learn Dutch, I promise.
I'm sure. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bom, vou mudar então para português rapidamente. É incrível esse debate, eu não consegui parar, mas a gente tem ainda algumas coisinhas para mostrar. Se vocês puderem ficar 15 minutinhos mais, eu vou mostrar aqui a minha tela. Só um minutinho. Eu fechei. Share. Vocês estão vendo a tela? Ou eu tô dividindo?
Não, você tem que colocar a tela inteira, Bia. Não, você estava dividindo.
Okay. Continuam todos aí em português? Só para falar então um pouco das nossas entregas. Essa é a nossa equipe, cada vez se fortalecendo e se unindo. Tem a Joana e a Juliana que estão conduzindo aí o nosso trabalho de comunicação, de redes sociais, e agora chegando também a equipe da Conexo, e todos aí os nossos especialistas. Eu já mostrei ali a nossa linha do tempo, né? Então, eu queria só destacar os resultados do nosso webinar anterior. A gente vai fazer a mesma coisa para esse e capturar todas as informações, todas as perguntas. Esse é o material que vai estar disponível para os membros. E essas são as nossas próximas reuniões. Então, a gente vai mandar, vai colocar nas nossas redes sociais. A próxima vai ser sobre o roadmap nacional, que a gente vai ter uma conversa também com o Chile, então uma conversa agora com a América Latina, que eu acho que vai ser muito interessante, e depois de volta com a Noruega. E eu queria apenas destacar, eu acho que complementa tudo que foi dito agora pelos nossos colegas da Holanda, a importância da liderança das empresas, dos governos. Foi lançada uma aliança de recuperação, onde tem 37 CEOs que se comprometem a fazer essa recuperação. Tem um programa nascendo na Inglaterra, que é o Build Back Better, que tem que juntar tanto a questão de recuperação da economia com a ação das mudanças climáticas, e essa transição necessita de empresas, de setores, todo mundo trabalhando junto. Então, aqui é justamente para destacar a importância da gente estar unido e reunido com um olhar comum para uma mudança positiva. Então, eu quero falar aqui um pouco das atividades dos nossos membros e chamar já pedir o Moisés para se organizar aí, que a gente vai fazer o pré-lançamento de uma linha de produto exclusiva deles. A gente teve o press release da Tonra, agradecemos aí pela parceria e o acordo assinado para participar do Hub. Como eu mencionei também, o lançamento da Nespresso, das cápsulas de café feita com alumínio reciclado, que em breve vão chegar no Brasil. A gente teve ontem o webinar da Covestro, o CEO da Covestro falando da importância dessa economia circular como um princípio global. Achei muito interessante. Obrigada, Herman, por dividir conosco esse convite, uma honra de poder ouvir o CEO falar. E aí, então, a gente chega aqui no nosso momento. Eu acho que o Fernando está com o vídeo aí pronto para nos mostrar.
Só deixa eu compartilhar, Bia. Vou pedir para você sair, aí eu compartilho. Obrigado.
Repensar, reduzir, reutilizar e reciclar. Você já deve ter escutado estas 4 palavras, mas você já parou para pensar o que elas realmente significam? Reduzir o quê? Reciclar o quê? O plástico foi um dos responsáveis da evolução de nossa sociedade. Permitiu o avanço de muitos setores e hoje é indispensável para a manutenção da vida. O que o torna ainda mais promissor são suas possibilidades dentro da economia circular. uma possibilidade de não retirar mais matéria-prima da natureza, e sim utilizar a matéria-prima que já está na sociedade. A sacola plástica que hoje te acompanha em suas compras, amanhã pode embalar outros itens de consumo. Precisamos assumir a responsabilidade sobre o futuro do nosso planeta, e esse futuro está em nossas mãos. O caminho para isso é simples, porque reciclar é o ciclo natural do plástico. Reciclar, cuidar da natureza. Esse é o nosso propósito. Este é o nosso projeto Nature Recycle, transformando o fim em um novo começo. A Plastweber recicla por ano uma média de 7.000 toneladas de plástico, mantendo o plástico na economia e fora da natureza. A nossa reciclagem é destinada à produção de novas embalagens plásticas que retornam à sociedade, utilizadas pela indústria alimentícia, bebidas, home e personal care, pet food, calçadista, moveleiro e outros. Através do nosso Centro de Pesquisa e Desenvolvimento, criamos uma resina exclusiva que nos permite a fabricação de produtos com plástico até 100% reciclado e com as cores da natureza, azul e verde. Estas embalagens formam a linha de produtos Blue Ocean e Green Forest. Mas não basta produzir produtos de qualidade com material reciclado. Também precisamos ensinar as pessoas a reutilizarem os recursos. Por isso, o Nature Cycle também compõe ações de conscientização e educação. Entre elas, temos a campanha Natal Mais Feliz, Resíduos pela Vida, o Óleo na Pia Nem Pensar e a Escola Sustentável. Nós estamos transformando o fim em um novo começo. E você é nosso convidado a fazer parte deste movimento. A nossa parte nós estamos fazendo. E você? Repensar, reduzir.
Bom, eu queria chamar o Moisés para nos contar um pouquinho desse lançamento e dizer que eu estou muito feliz, muito orgulhosa aí da trajetória da Plastweber, que desde as nossas primeiras conversas ele se sentiu comprometido com a economia circular, criou todo um novo formato para a Plastweber, que agora se chama Circular Plastics, e é uma honra poder, então, apresentar aí essa nova campanha, essa nova narrativa que eles estão colocando nos produtos, que trazem realmente um benefício aí para nosso mercado brasileiro. Moisés.
Bom dia a todos, colegas. É um prazer enorme estar aqui com vocês. Primeiro, agradecer a Beatriz pela oportunidade e, como você muito bem falou, Beatriz, foi uma construção que começou há muito tempo atrás em nossas conversas, nossos primeiros encontros, e eu quero dizer que foi fruto de uma parceria com a Exchange for Change, foi fruto de uma construção, de um novo entendimento do que é economia circular e entendermos o nosso papel dentro desse contexto. Com muita alegria que eu venho lançar em primeiríssima mão nesse fórum tão privilegiado que é o Hub de Economia Circular, e com a presença dos colegas e com a presença dos amigos que estão nos assistindo pelo YouTube, o lançamento do Nature Cycle foi uma ideia que coroa um trabalho que a gente vem fazendo há mais de 20 anos. A gente entendeu, a partir das conversas que nós tivemos no Hub, que não basta você fazer uma embalagem 100% reciclada, com material pós-consumo, usando princípios de sustentabilidade em teu processo. Não basta você ter inovação, não basta você ter certificações, não basta ter garantia de qualidade. É extremamente necessário, além de tudo isso, você criar uma cultura, um entendimento, um movimento onde você engaje as pessoas que estão envolvidas diretamente no projeto dentro da empresa, os clientes, os nossos clientes diretos, e comuniquemos tudo isso ao consumidor final. Pois fazer e não mostrar não está certo, assim como demonstrar coisas que não têm fundamento também não está correto. Então, a gente tem um projeto muito consistente, com vários princípios de sustentabilidade, baseado em princípios de conscientização da nossa comunidade. E hoje a gente tem uma ferramenta para comunicar isso ao mercado. Nós vamos conseguir chegar ao consumidor final, finalmente, e com o selo Nature Cycle e com toda uma estratégia de comunicação com o mercado, nós vamos levar este benefício ao consumidor final. E, obviamente, quem vai ganhar com isso somos todos nós, porque o consumidor está ávido por soluções sustentáveis. E o Nature Cycle, ele é para ser um movimento que faça com que as pessoas se agreguem a esse princípio e façam com que a reciclagem hoje das embalagens flexíveis aumente consideravelmente, porque hoje o calcanhar de Aquiles da reciclagem de plástico ainda são as embalagens flexíveis. O PET está altamente com uma tecnologia qualificada, um volume considerável. As embalagens rígidas já têm um alto percentual de reciclagem, mas o plástico flexível tem um grande desafio pela frente ainda. E nós sabemos que até 2025, para atingir 30% de reciclagem desses materiais, nós teremos que ter um crescimento de quase 10 vezes neste mercado. E será necessário um grande movimento para que a gente consiga atingir essa meta. E a Plastweber, junto com seus parceiros, o Hub de Economia Circular, todos os outros parceiros que colaboraram nessa caminhada, são extremamente importantes. Então, nós queremos convidar vocês para fazerem parte desse movimento. Tá? Agradecemos muito a oportunidade, Beatriz, colegas que estão nos prestigiando. E semana que vem, na Semana do Meio Ambiente, nós teremos o lançamento oficial com várias lives. Então, eu gostaria de convidá-los a seguirem nosso Instagram, que é @NatureCycleOficial ou @Plastweber. E também acessem e já prestigiem o nosso lançamento, que é o site naturecycle.com.br. E assim nós vamos ampliar, vamos levar essa mensagem aí para o mercado e certamente teremos ótimos frutos.
Com certeza, Moisés. Eu acho que é isso. Você é toda uma conjuntura, né? Você fazer a coisa da maneira correta, comunicar e educar o mercado, né? Educar o consumidor. Então, fantástico, tenho certeza que vão gerar muitas oportunidades aqui no Hub também. E então, para fechar, eu vou justamente mostrar qual vai ser as atividades da Semana do Meio Ambiente. Então, como você já falou, tem a live da Plastweber. Vai ser passada onde, Moisés?
A nossa live vai ser no Instagram da Plastweber e no Instagram do Nature Cycle Oficial.
Então tá bom. Então vai ser no Instagram.
Você é nossa convidada especial para inaugurar a Semana do Ambiente da Plastweber e também o lançamento oficial. Vai ser a Beatriz que vai estar abrindo em grande estilo.
Uau, que honra! Que honra! E a Casa da Moeda do Brasil também está organizando um webinar no dia 5 de junho, e a ideia deles foi também convidar outros membros do Hub. Então, a gente já fez a conexão, talvez com a Nespresso, com a Covesto, para a gente falar de materiais, falar de inovação, e vai ser, então, uma boa semana aí para a gente divulgar as nossas ações. Aqui só o último slide para colocar quais são os benefícios, então, das empresas para participarem desse hub. A gente convida a todos aqueles que estão aqui nos ouvindo, que queiram participar, para se juntar a nós, para sermos todos champions, não é, Moisés, da economia circular. E fica aí, então, a nossa fala padrão, né, de que economia circular são novas formas de produzir, consumir e se relacionar. E obrigada a todos. Se alguém ainda tiver alguma perguntinha, algum comentário, a gente ainda pode responder por aqui. Senão, eu agradeço a todos muitíssimo. Acho que foi um webinar riquíssimo de troca de conhecimento e que, com certeza, a gente fica mais forte, apesar desse atual cenário. Eu tenho certeza que a gente vai tirar muito aprendizado dessa situação toda. E eu fiquei muito contente com o que o David falou, né, que o papel do PACE é providenciar argumentos e material para informar os líderes dos benefícios da transição. E é isso, então, que a gente está aqui para vocês, para unir as empresas. Essa é a nossa missão, nosso propósito. Alguém vai falar mais alguma coisa? Ana Rúbia, Fernando, dá um tchauzinho, Natália.
Muito obrigada, pessoal.
Muito obrigado a
Sempre
todos.
maravilhoso.
Obrigado. Foi muito bom também o conteúdo. Uma
E
discussão
parabenizar a
muito profunda.
Plast Weber pela torcida organizada lá no YouTube. Todo mundo presente. Obrigada, Moisés.
Bacana.
Agradecer o pessoal das outras empresas. É sempre muito bacana trocar com vocês. Essa semana a gente teve o webinar da Covestro também, ó. Ótimo. Obrigada a todo mundo.
É isso aí. E fiquem atentos, então, nas nossas próximas atividades. Obrigada, Rodrigo, por estar aí com a gente. Muita coisa para a gente trocar. E estamos trazendo aí umas cabeças boas, pensantes aí, para a gente movimentar o Hub. Então, a nossa próxima reunião é dia 17 de junho. Vai ser uma reunião mais dedicada para membros e convidados, não é aberta a todo mundo, e vai ter uma sessão, então, de engajamento, de desenvolvimento de projeto, e vamos apresentar aí nossos novos conselheiros técnicos, experts circulares, que vão nos ajudar, então, aí a criar essas alianças e colocar essas peças do quebra-cabeça juntas. É isso. Então tá, gente. Então, muito obrigada. Um bom dia a todos e até breve. Fiquem de olhos aí nas nossas redes sociais para mais informações. O webinar vai ficar gravado. Se vocês quiserem ouvir novamente, que é muita coisa. Eu vou ter que ouvir de novo.
Tchau, tchau para vocês, tá?
Foram todos agora? Só nós?
6 pessoas, peraí, deixa eu ver. Aqui, somos só nós.
Ufa, gente do céu!
Muito bom, muito bom.
Tá no YouTube ainda. Obrigada, pessoal do YouTube. A gente vai ficar por aqui.